Hello, it's Scott Manley here with episode 26 of Reusable Space Program. When we last left the space program, we had been assembling our vehicle in orbit over Kerbal, and docking this tiny space tug onto it had induced some sort of spastic wobbly roll. And it took a great deal of effort to explore my options and try and bring this under control, but it seemed to resist all attempts to make it work the way I expected. As such, I have decided to resolve the naming debate by going with Norse mythology and naming this Sleipnir, which is, of course, Odin's steed, which had 8 legs, and this thing seems to work as well as an 8-legged horse does. But being unable to control a space vehicle has never made me shy away from the challenge before, so I think we're just going to continue on and carry on regardless. We all know that there is one option that is available to stop randomly spinning things, and that is, of course, time acceleration. As far as I'm concerned, it is something of a cheat to use it, but I literally went through everything. What happens is as soon as I try to provide any torque, we would have one part of the spacecraft flex one way and the other part would flex the other way, and it would just get all confused. It may be because there are still Mechanical Jeb 1 and Mechanical Jeb 2. But look, yes, we do the time acceleration and everything flips into shape. So from this point on, we shall presume that there was some genius Kerbal on board named Cheat. Cheat Kerman, that's a good name actually. No. We have some brilliant people on board. They will continue through everything, and yes, look, we have the rotating midsection still works despite that unfortunate rotation that occurred outside of that section. So now we need to add our interplanetary drive unit. We already have engines on it. However, we want to leave the lander in dual orbit, right? We want to make this mini space station up there, so we need a vehicle that will remain up there that can be used for exploring the planets. So, this is the drive unit, which is going to go on, and it's going to go on in front of the existing lander unit. It'll provide an extra fuel tank and an extra couple of engines. That'll hopefully lift our Delta V up and make the whole thing much more manageable, and give us more thrust. On top of this, we also have the idea to add another fuel tank at the rear, and this fuel tank will be used for injection into interplanetary orbits, but it will have engines of its own. That means that once it gets up to near escape velocity, it will detach and return to an orbit. So it's like a booster which returns to the surface, rather like the booster that we have, the reusable launcher here. Anyway, we're just going to continue standard launch profile here. This one is heavier than before. Now, normally, ideally I'd be able to run those nuclear rockets, but they're rather too close to the jet air intake, so we're not going to fire those until we're much further out. And because of that, we're also going to dump the jet engines. We can use those. We're using them for launch. We're going to ditch them in the ocean. We'll have to build the ocean collector thingy at some point, but once we've ditched those, we can actually switch to nuclear thrust and hopefully get a bit more bang for our buck, or miles for our gallon, or Delta V for our something or other of fuel. You know what I mean, though. Anyway, yes, 15 kilometers, firing the main engine, accelerating skywards. Nothing can stop me now unless the vehicle falls apart under the aerodynamic stresses, which is not unknown, but yes, we have made it. Now, we ditch those, and they'll probably land about 100 kilometers from the site. And we can now shut down the engines, fire those up. I'm sure I had that bound to an action group, but I realised that I'd forgotten it. So rather than risk firing parachutes or something, I just took the manual route out. Now, at this point, we could just detach that stage and get into orbit, but the launch vehicle, if we ditched it now, it would travel a long way around the planet, and recovering it would be a major problem. So we need to get the launch stack into orbit, right? It's not the best thing. It means that we're carrying all this extra fuel up, but we don't want to have to go halfway around the planet to recover it. And, the harvesters have started posting dev blogs again, and I mean amongst things like map filtering and Kerbal seats and flags for sure. And there was one particular dev blog which discussed the whole 80-20 problem. That is that 20% of your effort gets 80% done. It's the last 20% that takes 80% of the effort. So while they've been refining the features for spaceflight, they've kind of been ignoring the campaign features, the career mode. And they've really decided that they want to get that fleshed out. Now, the next release, 0.20, will probably have a bunch of features, but it won't have campaign mode. However, we imagine that will come into future versions a lot sooner. Now, on the other hand, the resource system is going to take a back seat for a while. Which, okay, I understand what's going on. A lot of people are mad at it, but, seriously, let the devs do their thing. I mean, one of the odd things about this is that the Kethane mod has forever been sitting in a state of it will be redundant in the next version. That's what everybody has been saying repeatedly, but it just keeps being relevant. It keeps, the resources keep not getting developed. And that's cool. But, sometimes I think that if the devs hadn't talked about resources repeatedly, then Kethane would have been developed into that by now. But because, the devs the mod developers were constantly under the impression that they were about to be made redundant, it never really blossomed in the way that other mod packs have. But that's cool, and I'm still using it, and it does everything I need. It produces the 4 fuel types. What it doesn't produce is parts, and that's a whole separate kettle of fish, which I didn't expect to get full on into the resource system anyway. So you'll notice that what we've done at this point is we've disabled the mainsail actually, and we're entirely running on nuclear rockets to get best bang for our buck and all that, right? We've trimmed our orbit. We're going to basically do a fly past within about 1 kilometer and then complete our final rendezvous. What I'm looking for right now is we want to get this thing going fast enough, and you see how the camera changed there? That's an indication that we're kind of getting up into orbital altitude. The camera does that once you switch from a suborbital to an orbital trajectory, right? However, the trajectory still ends up inside the atmosphere. What we want to do is get the vehicle moving fast enough that its periaps is above 70 kilometers, so we can ditch that and complete the docking, and then later the rest of the rocket can complete its deorbit. It doesn't need a huge amount of fuel, but it does need to do some work to make sure it lands relatively close to the spaceport. And so you see, we're just mousing over the apoaps value and getting close. 67, 68, 69, 70. And so time to ditch this party and say farewell. And now we've left the rest of the rocket to fend for itself. We have more than enough thrust. We have much more thrust here. So we just let ourselves cruise in on time acceleration. The physics has already loaded for this thing, so the game is already running like treacle. Now we're just going to perform a standard rendezvous. That means we stagger our way in. People say they can never complete the final rendezvous, right? They can get close, but they can't actually get in close. So look, the standard strategy, and I've explained this a bunch of times, is you look at your nav ball, and first thing you do is you make sure in target mode. You find the retrograde vector and you thrust until your relative velocity becomes 0. Then you point at the pink prograde or direct marker, not prograde, but pink direction marker, and thrust towards it. And you want to go fast enough that you will cover the distance in, 60 seconds or in minutes rather than hours, right? You don't want to be too fast, you don't want to be too slow. You certainly don't want to be going so fast that you can't turn around in time and end up barreling into your structure and being all embarrassed when you scatter everything across space. No, you do that, and then you flip around retrograde, with the negative velocity vector, compared to the target. And once you reach your closest point, you cancel out your velocity and then repeat that process until you get really close. That is the best way to get to your target. Once you have managed to get within 10 kilometers. You can do this from further out. The problem is that further out your trajectory starts to curve more because of the time it takes to get there. So it also takes more fuel. I mean, you can just thrust straight at the thing, but then you're not taking advantage of the way the orbit behaves. I mean, obviously you couldn't do this in a real rocket because your delta V tends to be much, much lower, right? You tend to have much lower delta V budget, so you can't really do aggressive approach maneuvers. You tend to do very slow approaches in slightly lower orbits and just let your velocity catch up. You see, it's much more efficient to change the height of your orbit than it is to change your relative velocity to the target, right? You know, so if you're approaching from a long distance, it only takes a very small thrust to drop your altitude so that you can catch it in a few orbits. Whereas if you wanted to go straight at it, you would have to burn a whole lot of delta V. Anyway, look, we've brought ourselves to rest relative to this target. Now, this is designed to sit between that fuel tank and the lander, so we have to take the lander off and plug it back in. So that's the first thing we're going to do. It doesn't actually have anybody on board at this time. It's not going to have any crew on it until we actually get to the target. The crew are, of course, sitting in the artificial gravity device, waiting, you know, playing games, playing, probably Scrabble, maybe? Although I don't know how to spell any Spanish words backwards, so I don't know how good I'd be at Scrabble. Kerbal Scrabble, yes. They're probably watching movies as well, or movie trailers. Maybe K-Tube, I don't know. Anyway, so we're just going to bring this down extremely slowly, bring it alongside, and I'm trying to angle the camera so that you can see always the spacecraft silhouetted against the galactic plane. That's, you know, we're on the dark side of the planet. This has no lights on it because it doesn't have any need for the lighting. It does have a cluster of batteries around the docking ports, and this is like a trick that I've started using now that I have the docking camera. The very small lights in the batteries make it a lot easier to see if something is docking to a target like that. Unfortunately, I didn't actually build that onto the fuel tank, so unless I'm going to try and reverse this entire, you know, epic-sized spacecraft onto my onto my drive section, that's not going to happen. So we're still going to have to dock manually and just take account of the fact that, well, it's night and I can't see anything. This is very dark, but this is, you know, what I see, unfortunately. And if you sit there waiting for it to get light, then you will spend a lot of time just jockeying for position. Holding position is not a good thing to do. It is a waste of fuel. So now I've got in below it, I'm just starting to try and come up. I'm not actually in, now I switch to a chase cam mode, so now I see where I'm going. Heading up and using the camera again, so we'll start to see it. Now you can see all the other numerical readouts on the camera. I have this clicked on in MechJeb is using parallel minus mode, and that's what you use for docking if you just want to have it hold your position manually. I find that a whole lot better than the actual docking autopilot with MechJeb 2. You use the docking pilot on MechJeb 2 and you will run out of fuel very, very quickly. Now, obviously MechJeb 2 is great if you cannot dock, but you need to then build your spacecrafts with loads of RCS fuel and very well balanced and all that other stuff. But look, you can see everything in the camera. We are getting close. We are getting closer. We are coming in so that we may dock with this spacecraft, and then we'll reassemble it, and we will almost be ready to head off on our mission. Although we will have to wait 3-4 weeks for the planets to align correctly. But, 3 to 4 week wait is fine when you're over the planet. We'll be able to swap out crews and everything else. We're just starting to try to align the rockets with the rest of the spacecraft. We have to agree on alignment so that the rockets from this don't actually collide with the rockets on the lander. And there we go, we've got the docking things touching. We're just going to get ourselves... Hey, now we got it. Excellent. So now bring the lander back to where it's come from. Of course, since the spacecraft is named after a mythical 8-legged horse, that means the lander will be the rear end of a mythical 8-legged horse. Which, does an 8-legged horse make like twice as much poop or something? Never mind. So what starts to happen, unfortunately, if you look at the navigation, the nav ball, there's some weird oscillation that's happening. And somehow Something's going wrong here. Now, we have Smart ASS disabled, right? We do not have MechJeb 1.0 on it. We don't have standard ASS enabled either. So something very weird is going on here. It's possibly the quantum struts that are just causing too much trouble. Also note that when I did time acceleration, it caused it caused a very big velocity bump. So I start to get concerned. Things are going wrong. And we detach this, right? We ditch our little tug because... And then the little tug wants to dock back on again. That is not good. No! So we figure it might be this new spacecraft. So we try to ditch it. And there it goes. Flying away and smashing solar panels everywhere. Not good at all. Oh dear. Oh dear. So... a grave decision has to be made back at Kerbal Space Center. It is believed that the mission is not salvageable at this point. There was something clearly wrong in the software, something wrong in the balancing, something that was not foreseen. Proceeding with the mission at this point would be unwise, given that they're missing chunks of their spacecraft and don't know what went wrong. But then... the crew pull a Jebediah. They say, hey, remember that old science fiction movie, Apollo 13? Hey, didn't those pink-skinned aliens in that movie manage to fly back from the moon using just the engines on their landing craft? Maybe we could do that, they say. What? That's crazy talk! Of course, maybe the commander of the mission is thinking that he doesn't want to be grounded for months as he sits through horribly boring inquiries as to what really went wrong. If he can salvage this mission, then maybe he can hold his head high the next time he sees Jebediah. So he goes for it despite the protestations of the suits back at Kerbal Space Center. He's going to take this thing out on a shakedown cruise. Missing a solar panel, missing parts of the rocket... he is going to see where he can go with it. He barely has enough fuel to get to Minmus, but if he can get there, then he can start refueling. Now, with the computer being so mistrustful, they decide to do this next docking manually. So no mechanical jeb here, just the docking camera. And it is a slow and steady operation. But it does handle well because it has been designed by the best Kerbal engineers. We all know that this has to work because if it doesn't work, then they won't be able to land. It's going to have to convert the fuel once they get to the target. It's going to require several trips to the Minmus surface, and from there they will hopefully be able to continue their voyage beyond the Kerbal sphere of influence. Now, that means they have 30 days to prove themselves. If they can prove themselves in that time, then perhaps he can salvage some of his career. And certainly the docking goes flawlessly. There's a bit of wobble there. But other than that, it does look flight capable. We have lost the space tug. It is floating somewhere out there. But I do not believe that it is needed for this mission. Now, we'll have to figure out what we can really hook up on this thing. It does look like it is handling nicely. We're just going to set ourselves up for a prograde burn because we're heading out to Minmus. It will take us a couple of turns around the planet, a couple of orbits around the planet to actually get enough velocity because the thrust on these is not great. We were expecting to have 4 engines, but now we're only running with 2. Nevertheless, we are running with a slightly less mass, so perhaps this will work after all. And there we are. Doesn't it look fantastic silhouetted against the sun like that? Ah, there's the planet Kerbal as well. And this takes a very, 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 very long time. Now what you can't see here is the fact that the frame rate is running ridiculously slow. This is of course 4 times normal speed. And you'll notice the timer is just yellow all the time. The physics is just too much for this all the time. But nevertheless, we are burning that nuclear engines, we're running them at full power and then heating up the reagents and then spitting them out the back so that Newton will bring us forwards. That's obviously Isaac Kerr Newton, right? Or maybe Newton Kerman. Still, also note that since we are in maneuvering mode, the artificial gravity system is currently locked down. You do not want to have the maneuvering system running while you have the artificial gravity system going, because the artificial gravity system removes the struts, the extra supports, which means that it's a little more flexible. Also, if you try to turn left and right while you're in a rotating object, you get, gyroscopic precession issues, which would actually make it very hard to navigate the whole thing. So, standard mission procedures is that when they're undergoing major maneuvers, this artificial gravity ring is locked down. I say ring, I mean artificial gravity device thingy, which only rotates a few times per minute. There we go, we're up. Gonna get past the moon. Our fuel is actually running very, very low, but I think we're gonna do just fine. We've obviously managed to pick the worst part of the orbit as well, where it's going to be as high up as... Yeah, we're so close to the node is kind of running at 90 degrees to us. That means we're going to have to make the biggest possible correction to the inclination, because the Minmus is going to be at its maximal distance outside the plane when we reach Apo Key. And there we go, 55, 45, 46. Now we need to just figure out our maneuver nodes and get ourselves as close to the target as possible. This is going to require a bit of manipulation and messing around, but ultimately, we'll do the business. It takes a little more. We just add a little more velocity, and there we have an encounter. And so now we switch ourselves to prepare for interacting with the first maneuver node. And the first maneuver node is 30 plus minutes away. So we're not going to start up the artificial gravity section just yet. We go into this vertical notion, which because that's where the maneuver node is. But I don't know if you know, the Apollo missions, they would go into a very similar orientation while traveling to the moon, and they would rotate. They called this the barbecue spit maneuver, where they would have the spacecraft kind of slowly rotating on its long axis, so that the spacecraft would get uniformly heated, right? So that one side wouldn't get hotter than the others, and one side wouldn't get colder, obviously. And so this is looking very similar to that. But the main reason it's in this orientation is because it has to perform a small correction burn here. And I guess it's rotating a bit. Oh, I wonder what the G-forces are at the end of those things. Be really nice if the accelerometers actually worked correctly and generated the... Wow, look at the wobbling. The wobbling of the spacecraft is adjusting my orbit by thousands of kilometers even. It's ridiculous. And I think that's us. Look, we have crew in the artificial gravity segment, so we got to turn off our nuclear engines and transfer some fuel over, which takes forever, and then fire this after obviously unlinking the quantum struts. There we go! We are finally headed to Minmus. And perhaps we will find something there that will prove the space worthiness of this vessel, so that it can indeed go to brave new worlds. But until then, I am Scott Manley. Fly safe.